Hello again, Scrum Masters! Today we're going back in time to the year 2001, a Scrum Odyssey? So why are we going back in time? To solve a mystery, of course. Specifically, we're going to identify how is Scrum aligned to the values and principles of the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Wow! That's Learning Objective 1.1 in Scrum Foundations. If you're ready to go, I know I am, so let's fire up the TARDIS, grab your box of Scooby Snacks, and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to the Scrum Master Guide, powered by Agile Coffee. My name is Vic Bonacci, and I'm the host of the Agile Coffee podcast, as well as a certified Scrum trainer. I'm putting these videos together so that you, as a Scrum Master or maybe someone who's interested in becoming a Scrum Master, can start to get knowledge and gain confidence, which will lead to your own success as a Scrum Master. So welcome. So where were you in 2001? And yes, I'm asking you to reflect because as a Scrum Master, you're a teacher, you're a guide, you're an evangelist of Scrum and Agile within your organization and your community. So it's really important to find your own narrative and see where your thread plays into this same tapestry that we're going to talk about. In fact, as for me, I was changing jobs, becoming familiar with object-oriented programming. I was studying Java. And this is in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, with my friends Kirti and Peter and Glenn and our boss Mike and his boss, Kurt. In fact, it was Kurt about 3 or 4 months later that came bounding out of his office, holding the book up high, Extreme Programming Explained, and loudly exclaiming to anyone who would listen that this is the future of what our organization is going to be looking at, what we're going to be doing, what we're all about. Well, the idea to come together and meet at the retreat in Snowbird actually started a year earlier with Kent Beck and others at a retreat of their own out in Oregon. They were sitting around talking about extreme programming and the practices and the values, and they were saying, wouldn't it be great if we could find other practitioners and proponents of these lightweight processes and have them all come together and meet with us, and we can all talk about what's common among these processes and what are the goals that we'd like to see? How would we like to see the industry change? And so Bob Martin started an email thread, and it wasn't long before the people on this thread started suggesting their own agenda items and goals. Eventually, 17 of these thought leaders got together for 3 days in February of 2001 at the ski lodge in Snowbird. Despite expectations not being so high, in fact, these people for the most part didn't know each other. Many of them were just meeting for the first time. But still, if you read the accounts and you talk to anyone who was there, every person came out pleasantly surprised that they came up with these 4 value pairs in a rather quick session without much debate and not too much back and forth. So let's take a look at those 4 values. Now, when they got together, they didn't have the name Manifesto of Agile right off the bat. They started talking first about what are the values, what are the things that they've observed as they were making software and helping other people make software. In fact, when you look at the website, agilemanifesto.org, you will see that there's only 68 words that comprise what we think of as the Agile Manifesto. And it starts off by saying, here we are uncovering better ways of working and helping others do the same. We're uncovering better ways of working while doing it and helping others do the same. And through that, we have come to value, and then they lay out these 4 values. And as I said, they came about these 4 values without a lot of back and forth and debating. In fact, as you see here on this image here from Andy Hunt, there wasn't a lot of change even from the first draft to the final draft. So let's talk about it and what it looks like here. First of all, you'll notice that I have these greater than signs as a shortcut to saying over or more than. Because when they wrote the manifesto value pairs, they weren't saying that we don't value things like processes and tools and contract negotiation and all this. They're saying that there's still value in this, but they find more value in the items on the left, which is really critical because oftentimes we hear people say, oh, Agile means we don't have to do documentation. That's not the case. They're saying there may still be value in documentation, but there's more value in, for example, working software. So let's go through these in turn. First of all, you see individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So again, that goes to the idea that we would rather have people talking to each other and interacting rather than just people putting things into something like Jira, for example. And by the way, when I'm doing this graphical representation, I encourage you as a Scrum Master to find your own way to describe these, whether it's through some images or a story or whatever it is. So if you could describe these value pairs to your team or other people in your organization, you're going to become a superb Scrum Master because you can clearly articulate the meaning behind the Agile Manifesto. So here we go. Processes and tools. So rather than relying on processes and tools, rather than writing a user story or a product backlog item and putting it into some electronic tool, the writers of the manifesto said, let's rely rather on the people talking to each other. So where does that come into play when we're talking about Scrum? Well, certainly you think of, as we just talked about, a PBI that's in a backlog somewhere, whether it's on Jira or some other tool, versus people talking about it in a backlog refinement meeting, in a sprint planning meeting, during the daily Scrum, or really anywhere where two or more people can gather together and talk about the idea of what it is we're trying to build. So it's those interactions, the writers said, that are more valuable than actually just using or relying upon some process or tool. So the second value pair says working software over comprehensive documentation. And when I talk about this value pair to my classes in my Certified Scrum Master class, I'll maybe say, it's not just working software, but it could be really working product. The idea of showing the customer or the stakeholder something tangible at the end of any given sprint, or more frequently if you can. The idea that if you promise them something, they'd rather get their hands on it. Imagine that you have a child and you told your child that here at the end of 2 weeks they could have you're working on a game or you're working on building them a toy or something like that. And so they get to the end of that 2 weeks and they're like, hey, great, I want to start playing with that toy. Well, guess what? You can't play with that toy because we're just going to give you a description of the toy. That child's not going to be very happy, right? So you want to give them something that they can get their hands on so they can give feedback on. So, for example, we're going to talk about the idea of empiricism and inspect and adapt, and that really plays into this very, very tightly. You'll see on the other side, we've got the comprehensive documentation aspect. And I've worked, and I've told you about the job in Michigan. That's one place that reminds me of binders full of requirements, and they would fill up a shelf or shelves or many units of shelves, right? And we might even have a dedicated room with under lock and key, where you can go and find all the requirements. Puts you to sleep, right? There's so many requirements. So instead of stuffing all these requirements into binders, can we instead have some visible, tangible working software or product at the end of any given sprint? And Jeff Sutherland himself even says that any Scrum without working product at the end of the sprint is a failed Scrum. So keep that in mind. That's something that the writers of the manifesto and the people who put together Scrum had in common. They really put an emphasis on that working software idea. The third value pair has to do with customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So customer collaboration could take many different forms, right? The idea of working with your customer early and often, getting their buy-in, checking in with them, asking them questions fully throughout the whole process, all along the way. So you don't just sign a contract at the beginning of an engagement and leave it be. We've all been in situations like that where someone says, okay, this is what I want. I'll check back with you in 9 months or a year, whatever it is. Well, we're missing that really valuable feedback loop that we get with Scrum at the end of every sprint or whenever you have checkpoints, so that you could get that feedback from the customer and they could kind of help you course correct by collaborating with the customer. And then the last value pair of the Manifesto for Agile Software Development has to do with responding to change over following a plan. So a lot of us have been on teams where it felt kind of like a death march, right? Where you were kind of all marching in sync because someone had a plan and they were giving everyone clear and concrete directions on how to accomplish it, but there was no case for like course correcting along the way. So you might come to the area where you have to span a gap and, what do we do here? Oh, the plan says keep marching forward. Well, that's not necessarily helpful in this case when we're developing these products. So we're saying we have to be able to respond to change. So if we see that there's a critical gap or an impediment in our way, we want to know what resources do we have as a team that we can together accomplish that change of course, that we can bridge that gap, if you will. So responding to change is much more important than following a plan kind of blindly out of just being told to follow a plan. So how does that come about in Scrum? Well, again, we've got these inspect and adapt points built throughout Scrum, whether it's at a retrospective for the process or the sprint review for the product itself, or anywhere along the way in a daily Scrum or otherwise. So I encourage you as a Scrum Master to come up with your own way of how you illustrate the plan, whether it's through drawings or videos or analogies or metaphors. Be creative and think about it. Because the 68 words that the writers of the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, those 68 words that they drafted there, they felt pretty good right off the bat. Hey, these are good. These reflect the feelings, the values that we share. And they've stood the test of time. It's going on 20 years now since they drafted this, but still the key fundamentals hold. Now, it's not just the value pairs that this group of 17 thought leaders came together to write in February of 2001. They also came up with 12 principles. And in my class, what I do is I list the 12 principles, and then we'll have the group break into teams and discuss maybe how can we convert that principle into a short hashtag or something like that. And it's a really fun exercise. But they didn't come up with all 12 principles during that 3-day session at Snowbird. In fact, they started it, and then they took on the rest of the task asynchronously. Ward Cunningham put this up on his wiki, and the 17 people, and maybe others, I don't know, kind of started contributing ideas and suggestions for how can we make these principles as robust as the 4 value pairs. So I would encourage all of you to visit the website, agilemanifesto.org, see the 4 value pairs, click on the link that says the 12 principles, and get familiar with those principles behind the manifesto. And then also spend some time reading about the history and seeing who the signatories are and getting to know their biographies as well. I think it's really important to understand the historical context of Scrum and Agile, especially if you're a Scrum Master. Because as I said earlier, you're the one who's teaching the rest of the organization, your team, the leadership, the stakeholders. You're out there evangelizing why Scrum is such a powerful and valuable process framework that we're using. So get to know it and tie yourself into that narrative. Come up with your own stories that kind of reflect where you were in your own journey toward understanding this. History itself is something that I could spend many more videos on. However, we're going to start shifting gears and looking at more of the practical nuts and bolts aspects of Scrum coming up here. So the upcoming learning objectives are really going to be covering the framework itself. But if you enjoyed the last 2 videos, this one and episode 3, let me know in the comments below. I want to thank you for joining me again today on the Scrum Master Guide, powered by Agile Coffee. Join me next time. We're going to talk about the values of Scrum. I look forward to seeing you then.